Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked through the busy airport terminal, pulling her small suitcase behind her. After 3 long days of flying back and forth across the country, she was finally heading home to Denver. Her uniform was packed away in her bag, and she wore simple jeans, sneakers, and a comfortable sweater. To anyone watching, she looked like just another tired traveler trying to get home. Lisa had been flying commercial planes for 15 years. She started as a flight instructor right out of college, then worked her way up through regional airlines before landing her dream job with a major carrier. Flying was in her blood. Her father had been a mechanic at a small airport, and she grew up watching planes take off and land, dreaming of the day she would be in the cockpit. At 38 years old, Lisa was one of the youngest captains at her airline. She had worked twice as hard as many of her male colleagues to prove herself. The aviation industry was still very much a man's world, and being a Latina woman made her path even more challenging. But Lisa never let obstacles stop her. She studied harder, flew more hours, and earned every rating and certification she could get. Today's flight was what pilots called deadheading. This meant she was traveling as a passenger to get back to her home base, where she would start another series of flights tomorrow. The airline provided her with a regular seat in the main cabin. Some pilots preferred to sit in first class when deadheading, but Lisa was happy anywhere she could relax for a few hours. She checked in at the gate and noticed the usual mix of business travelers, families, and vacation-goers waiting to board Flight 447. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop while talking loudly on his phone about some important meeting. A young mother tried to keep her 2 small children entertained with coloring books and snacks. An elderly couple sat quietly, holding hands and watching the planes through the large windows. Lisa found an empty seat near the gate and pulled out her tablet. She liked to read during flights when she wasn't working. Today she had downloaded a mystery novel that her sister had recommended. As she started reading, she felt herself beginning to unwind from the stress of the past few days. The gate agent announced that boarding would begin in about 30 minutes. Lisa looked up from her book and watched the ground crew preparing the plane outside. Even after all these years, she still felt a small thrill when she saw the aircraft that would soon carry her home. This particular plane was a Boeing 737, one of her favorites to fly. She knew every switch, button, and system in that cockpit. A flight attendant named Jennifer walked past, recognizing Lisa immediately. "Hey, Captain Rodriguez, deadheading home today?" Lisa smiled and nodded. "Finally. It's been a long week. Looking forward to sleeping in my own bed tonight." Jennifer laughed. "I bet. Have a relaxing flight. The crew today is really good, so you're in excellent hands." "I'm sure I am. Thanks, Jennifer." As Jennifer walked away, Lisa noticed a few other passengers glancing over. She was used to this. People were always curious when they overheard someone being called captain. In her casual clothes, she looked young for a pilot, which sometimes surprised people. She had learned long ago to just smile politely and go back to her book. The waiting area filled up as departure time approached. Lisa could hear conversations in several different languages. A group of college students discussed their spring break plans. 2 businesswomen shared travel horror stories about delayed flights and lost luggage. An older man read a newspaper while his wife worked on a crossword puzzle. Lisa loved watching people in airports. Everyone had a story, a reason for traveling, somewhere important to be. Some looked excited about their journey, while others seemed nervous about flying. She remembered her first time on an airplane as a child. Her family had saved up for months to visit relatives in California. She had pressed her face against the window during takeoff, amazed that something so heavy could fly through the clouds. That wonder had never left her. Even now, with thousands of flight hours under her belt, she still marveled at the science and engineering that made flight possible. Every takeoff was a small miracle, a victory of human innovation over gravity. The gate agent's voice came over the intercom, interrupting her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin boarding Flight 447 to Denver in just a few minutes. We'll start with our first-class passengers and those needing extra assistance." Lisa closed her tablet and gathered her things. She was in boarding group 3, so she had a few more minutes to wait. She watched as passengers began lining up, checking their phones one last time and organizing their carry-on bags. A businessman complained loudly to his colleague about having to travel in coach. "I can't believe they put me back there. Don't they know who I am? Lisa shook her head slightly. She had flown celebrities, politicians, and business executives who treated flight attendants with respect and kindness. She had also flown people who seemed to think buying a plane ticket made them royalty. Attitude had nothing to do with seat location or ticket price. As boarding continued, Lisa thought about her plans for the weekend. Her sister was bringing her kids over for dinner tomorrow night. Lisa loved being Aunt Lisa, even though she didn't have children of her own. Her career had required so much travel and dedication that serious relationships had been difficult to maintain. But she was content with her life. Flying gave her purpose and joy in a way that nothing else could. Now boarding Group 3, the gate agent announced. Lisa stood up and joined the line. The businessman from earlier pushed past several people, claiming he needed to catch a connection in Denver. The gate agent politely reminded him that his boarding group hadn't been called yet, and he reluctantly stepped back with an annoyed expression. As Lisa handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, the woman smiled warmly. "Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. Have a wonderful flight home. Thank you. I'm sure I will." Lisa walked down the jet bridge, breathing in the familiar smell of aviation fuel and coffee from the galley. She found her seat in row 12, stowed her bag in the overhead compartment, and settled in by the window. The seat next to her was still empty, which would give her extra room to read. More passengers filed past her, families finding their seats, business travelers checking emails one last time before the doors closed. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, helping passengers with their bags and answering questions about connections and arrival times. Lisa watched through the window as ground crew members loaded luggage and cargo into the plane's belly. The careful choreography of airport operations never got old. Every person had a specific job, and when everyone did their part correctly, hundreds of passengers arrived safely at their destinations every day. She opened her tablet again and returned to her mystery novel. In a few hours, she would be home in Denver, and this would just be another routine flight in her logbook. She had no way of knowing that this particular journey would become anything but routine, and that before it was over, everyone on board would witness something that would change how they thought about assumptions, respect, and standing up for what's right. The boarding process was nearly complete when the intercom crackled to life. The gate agent's voice carried a tone that made everyone stop what they were doing and listen carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief announcement regarding Flight 447. We're experiencing a slight delay this afternoon due to an operational issue. Please remain seated while we work to resolve this matter. We'll have more information for you shortly." Lisa looked up from her book, immediately alert. As a pilot, she knew that operational issue could mean many different things. Weather delays were common and usually not serious. Mechanical problems required more investigation. But the vague nature of the announcement suggested something unexpected had happened. Murmurs began spreading through the cabin as passengers started speculating about what might be wrong. The businessman who had been complaining earlier threw his hands up in frustration. "This is unbelievable. I have the most important meeting of my career in Denver tonight. If I miss it because of some delay, heads are going to roll." His traveling companion tried to calm him down. "Relax, Mike. I'm sure it's nothing serious. These things happen all the time. Easy for you to say. Your job doesn't depend on being there by 6 o'clock. Lisa had heard similar conversations countless times during her career. Delays were frustrating for everyone, but getting angry rarely helped the situation. She continued reading, though she kept one ear tuned to any additional announcements. A few minutes later, the gate agent's voice returned, this time with more specific information that sent a ripple of concern through the cabin. "Folks, I need to update you on our situation. Our scheduled captain for today's flight has called in sick with food poisoning. He became ill this morning and is unable to fly. We're currently working with crew scheduling to locate a replacement pilot. This may take some additional time, and we appreciate your patience." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some passengers groaned in frustration. Others pulled out their phones to check for alternative flights or call people about their delayed arrival. The mother with 2 young children looked worried as she calculated how this might affect her evening plans. "How long are we talking about?" called out a passenger from the back of the plane. The gate agent, who had boarded to make the announcement in person, looked genuinely sympathetic. "I wish I could give you an exact time frame, but finding a qualified replacement pilot isn't always quick. It could be anywhere from 1 to several hours, depending on crew availability. We're doing everything we can to minimize the delay. Lisa felt a familiar tug in her chest. She was qualified to fly this exact aircraft type. She had her captain's license, current medical certificate, and was completely legal to operate this flight. The airline's operations manual allowed deadheading crew members to step in during emergencies exactly like this one. But she hesitated. Lisa had been looking forward to relaxing during the flight home. After 3 intense days of flying, she was mentally and physically tired. Stepping into the captain's seat meant taking on the responsibility for 150 passengers and crew members. It meant conducting pre-flight checks, reviewing weather reports, and ensuring everything was perfect for a safe journey. More importantly, she knew that revealing her identity as a pilot might draw unwanted attention. Some passengers became nervous when they learned their pilot was a woman, especially one who looked as young as Lisa did. She had dealt with skeptical looks and inappropriate comments before. Sometimes it was easier to just blend in. The businessman named Mike was getting more agitated by the minute. This is absolutely ridiculous. How does an airline not have backup pilots available? Don't they plan for these situations? A flight attendant named David tried to explain. Sir, we do have reserve pilots, but they have to be qualified on this specific aircraft type, and they need to be legally rested according to federal regulations. We can't just pull any pilot off the street. Well then, maybe you should have more pilots on standby, Mike shot back. Lisa watched the exchange with growing concern. She could see the stress building among passengers and crew members alike. The flight attendants were doing their best to manage the situation, but they had limited information to share. An elderly gentleman in the row behind Lisa spoke up in a calm voice. Young man, getting upset isn't going to make a pilot appear any faster. These folks are doing their jobs. Maybe we should all just take a deep breath and be patient. Mike turned around, his face red with anger. Easy for you to say, old man. You probably don't have anywhere important to be. The elderly man's wife placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm, and he settled back into his seat without responding to the insult. Lisa admired his restraint. She had seen how stress and delays could bring out the worst in people. A young woman across the aisle was on her phone with someone, probably a family member. No, Mom, I don't know when we'll take off. The pilot is sick. Yes, I know you made dinner reservations. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it. Lisa could hear the frustration in her voice mixed with disappointment. Delayed flights didn't just affect business meetings. They disrupted family gatherings, special occasions, and important personal moments that couldn't be rescheduled. The mother with the 2 small children was trying to keep them entertained, but the kids were getting restless. The little boy kept asking when they would fly to see Grandma, and his sister was starting to fuss. Lisa remembered being that age and how exciting airplane trips had been. Delays could turn an adventure into an ordeal for young families. Attention, passengers. The gate agent announced again. We've contacted several reserve pilots, but unfortunately, none are available to operate today's flight within the next 2 hours. We're continuing to explore all options, including the possibility of rebooking passengers on later flights. This news brought audible groans from throughout the cabin. Rebooking would mean even longer delays, possibly overnight stays, and missed connections for passengers traveling beyond Denver. Lisa looked around at the faces surrounding her. She saw frustration, disappointment, and worry. The businessman would miss his important meeting. The young woman might not make it to her family dinner. The children would have to wait even longer to see their grandmother. She thought about her comfortable apartment in Denver, her soft bed, and the relaxing evening she had planned. Then she thought about her responsibility as a pilot and the oath she had taken to serve passengers safely and professionally. Lisa had always believed that being a pilot meant more than just flying planes. It meant being a public servant, someone who helped people get to where they needed to be. Every flight carried dreams, hopes, business opportunities, and family reunions. When she sat in the captain's seat, she wasn't just responsible for operating an aircraft. She was responsible for helping people live their lives. The gate agent was gathering papers, preparing to leave the aircraft and continue working on solutions from the gate area. Time was ticking away, and Lisa could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her. She closed her book and took a deep breath. Sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping out of your comfort zone. Sometimes it meant taking on responsibility when you would rather rest. And sometimes it meant facing whatever challenges came with revealing who you really were. Lisa was about to stand up and identify herself when something unexpected happened that would change everything about this routine delay. Heavy footsteps echoed through the aircraft as someone new boarded the plane. Lisa looked up to see a large man in a dark security uniform, walking down the aisle with an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. His name tag read Officer Tom Bradley, and everything about his demeanor suggested he took his job very seriously. Officer Bradley had worked airport security for 20 years. He was the kind of man who believed that rules existed for good reasons, and that following them strictly was the only way to keep everyone safe. At 55 years old, he had seen everything from minor disputes to serious security threats. He prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it started. Today, Bradley was conducting what the airport called a delay security sweep. Whenever a flight was significantly delayed, security personnel would board to ensure that nothing suspicious was happening and that all passengers remained properly documented and seated. It was a routine procedure, but Bradley approached every routine task with the intensity of a major investigation. As he walked through the cabin, Bradley's eyes swept back and forth, taking in details that most people would never notice. He looked for nervous behavior, inappropriate conversations, or anything that seemed out of place. His training had taught him that dangerous situations often began with small signs that seemed innocent to untrained observers. The passengers watched him with a mixture of curiosity and mild concern. Some had never seen a security officer board their plane before a flight, and they wondered if this meant there was some kind of threat they didn't know about. Bradley reached the front of the cabin and turned to address the passengers. His voice was loud and authoritative, cutting through the various conversations happening throughout the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Officer Bradley with Airport Security. Due to the extended delay, I'll be conducting a routine security check. Please have your identification ready if requested, and remain in your seats unless directed otherwise. Most passengers nodded and reached for their wallets or purses, understanding that this was probably standard procedure. The businessman Mike looked annoyed at yet another complication, but even he seemed to recognize that security matters were not something to argue about. Bradley began walking through the cabin again, this time more slowly and deliberately. He stopped occasionally to speak with passengers, checking identification and asking routine questions about their travel plans. His interactions were professional but firm, and most people responded cooperatively. When Bradley reached Lisa's row, something caught his attention. While other passengers seemed agitated or frustrated by the delay, she appeared completely calm. She was reading a book, looking relaxed and unbothered by the situation that had everyone else on edge. To Bradley, this calm demeanor seemed suspicious. In his experience, innocent passengers were usually upset about delays, especially long ones that might disrupt their plans. Someone who remained perfectly relaxed during a stressful situation might be hiding something. He also noticed other details about Lisa that triggered his suspicion. She was young, probably in her 30s, and Hispanic. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, not like the business travelers in suits or the families in vacation clothes. Her carry-on bag was small and simple, unlike the large, expensive luggage that many passengers carried. Bradley's training had unfortunately been influenced by outdated profiling methods that associated certain demographic characteristics with higher risk levels. While these methods had been largely discredited and were officially discouraged, some older officers still relied on them subconsciously. "Excuse me, Miss," Bradley said, stopping directly beside Lisa's seat. His tone was sharp and demanding, not the polite request that other passengers had received. Lisa looked up from her book, slightly surprised by the aggressive approach. "Yes, officer. I need to see your identification and boarding pass." "Of course," Lisa replied calmly. She reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license and boarding pass, handing them to Bradley without any argument or resistance. Bradley examined the documents carefully, looking for any signs of tampering or fraud. Lisa's driver's license was perfectly legitimate, issued by the state of Colorado with all the proper security features. Her boarding pass was also genuine, printed by the airline's computer system. But instead of being satisfied, Bradley seemed to become more suspicious. "What's the purpose of your travel today?" "I'm going home to Denver," Lisa answered simply. "Where are you coming from?" "I've been working on the East Coast for the past few days. Bradley's eyes narrowed. What kind of work? Lisa hesitated for just a moment. She could simply say she was a pilot. But something about Bradley's aggressive tone made her cautious. I work for the airline. Doing what exactly? I'm a pilot. Bradley let out a short, dismissive laugh. Right. And I'm the President of the United States. Lisa felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had encountered this kind of disbelief before, but it never got easier to deal with. I can show you my pilot's license if you'd like. Oh, I'm sure you can show me all kinds of interesting documents, Bradley said sarcastically. Let's see this so-called pilot's license. Lisa reached back into her purse and pulled out her commercial pilot's license, along with her airline identification card. Both documents clearly identified her as Captain Lisa Rodriguez, qualified to operate commercial aircraft. Bradley took the documents and examined them with obvious skepticism. To him, they looked too clean, too perfect. He had seen fake documents before, and in his suspicious mindset, these seemed almost too good to be real. These look pretty fancy, he said, his tone suggesting he thought they were forgeries. Where'd you get them made? Lisa felt her patience beginning to wear thin, but she kept her voice steady and professional. They're issued by the Federal Aviation Administration and my airline. They're completely legitimate. Uh-huh, Bradley said, clearly unconvinced. And you just happen to be a pilot sitting here in coach like a regular passenger? I'm deadheading home after completing flights on the East Coast. It's very common for pilots to travel as passengers when they're not on duty. Bradley had never heard the term deadheading before, and his unfamiliarity with airline operations made him even more suspicious. Deadheading? That sounds like some kind of code word to me. Other passengers were beginning to notice the confrontation. The elderly gentleman behind Lisa looked concerned, and the mother with 2 children was watching nervously. Even the businessman Mike had stopped complaining about the delay to observe what was happening. Bradley's voice was getting louder, drawing more attention to the situation. I think you need to come with me for additional screening. These documents don't look right to me. Lisa felt her heart rate increasing, but she maintained her composure. Officer, I assure you that everything is completely legitimate. If you have questions about my credentials, you can contact the airline's crew scheduling department. They can verify my employment and qualification. I don't need to contact anyone, Bradley said firmly. What I need is for you to stand up and come with me now. The tension in the cabin was becoming palpable. Passengers were putting down their phones and books to watch the unfolding drama. Some looked confused, others appeared concerned, and a few seemed to be reaching for their phones to record what was happening. Flight attendant David, who had been helping passengers in the forward cabin, noticed the commotion and began walking toward the back of the plane. He recognized Lisa as one of the airline's pilots, but Bradley's aggressive posture and raised voice made him hesitant to intervene immediately. Lisa realized that this situation was rapidly escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. Bradley seemed determined to see her as a threat, regardless of what evidence she provided. His mind was made up, and nothing she said was going to change it. She also understood that making a scene or arguing with a security officer would only make things worse. As a pilot, she was trained to de-escalate tense situations and prioritize the safety and comfort of everyone around her. Officer Bradley, she said quietly, I'm happy to cooperate with any security procedures you need to follow, but I think there may be a misunderstanding here that we can clear up very easily. Bradley wasn't interested in clearing up misunderstandings. In his mind, he had identified a potential security threat, and his job was to remove that threat from the aircraft. Everything else was just details to be sorted out later. The atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with tension as Officer Bradley's voice continued to rise. What had started as a routine document check was quickly turning into something much more serious and uncomfortable for everyone on board. I don't have time for games, Bradley announced loudly, holding Lisa's pilot license up in the air like it was evidence at a trial. These documents are obviously fake. No airline would hire someone like you to fly their planes. Lisa felt the sting of his words, but she had learned long ago not to let ignorant comments derail her professionalism. Officer, I understand you're just doing your job, but I can assure you that everything I've shown you is completely legitimate. Perhaps we could step off the aircraft to discuss this privately. Oh no, Bradley said, shaking his head vigorously. You're not going anywhere until I get to the bottom of this. Stand up, now. The elderly gentleman behind Lisa could no longer stay quiet. "Excuse me, officer, but this young lady has been nothing but polite and cooperative. What exactly is the problem here?" Bradley turned his glare toward the older man. "Sir, I need you to mind your own business. This is a security matter, and I'm handling it appropriately." "It doesn't look appropriate to me," the gentleman replied calmly. "It looks like harassment." "Harassment?" Bradley's face turned red with anger. "I'm trying to protect everyone on this plane from potential threats. Maybe you should be thanking me instead of criticizing my methods." The businessman, Mike, who had been so upset about the delay earlier, found himself in the unexpected position of agreeing with the elderly passenger. "Look, officer, I'm not usually one to get involved, but this seems excessive. She's shown you her identification, she's answered your questions, and she's been completely respectful. What more do you want?" Bradley was not accustomed to having his authority questioned by multiple people at once. In his mind, passengers should simply comply with his instructions and trust his judgment. The fact that people were speaking up in Lisa's defense only reinforced his belief that something suspicious was happening. "What I want," Bradley said, pointing a finger at Mike, "is for everyone to stay in their seats and let me do my job. This woman is carrying suspicious documents and she's giving me a story that doesn't add up. I have every right to investigate further." Flight attendant David finally reached the scene, though he approached cautiously. He could see that Bradley was agitated, and experience had taught him that confronting an angry security officer directly was rarely productive. "Officer Bradley," David said in his most diplomatic tone, "is there anything I can help you with? I'm familiar with all our passengers today." "Yeah, you can help by staying out of my way," Bradley snapped, "unless you want to tell me that you actually believe this woman is a pilot." David hesitated. He knew exactly who Lisa was, but he also understood that contradicting Bradley publicly might escalate the situation even further. "Well, actually what?" Bradley demanded. "Actually, I think there might be some confusion here. Captain Rodriguez is indeed one of our pilots. She's deadheading home to Denver after completing a trip sequence." Bradley stared at David with disbelief and growing anger. "You're telling me you actually think this woman can fly airplanes?" "I'm telling you that she's a fully qualified captain with our airline," David replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite Bradley's intimidating presence. "That's impossible," Bradley declared. "Look at her. She's too young, she's dressed like a college student, and she doesn't look like any pilot I've ever seen." Lisa felt the weight of every stereotype and prejudice she had fought against throughout her career. Bradley's words cut deep because they reflected attitudes she had encountered repeatedly in the aviation industry. But she also recognized that arguing with him would only make the situation worse. "Officer Bradley," she said quietly, "I understand this might be surprising to you. A lot of people have preconceived ideas about what pilots look like. But I can provide you with additional documentation if needed. My employee number is—" "I don't want to hear any more lies," Bradley interrupted. "I want you to stand up and come with me right now. We're going to sort this out at the security office." The mother with 2 young children was watching the entire exchange with growing anxiety. Her little boy kept asking questions about why the policeman was being mean to the nice lady. Other passengers were becoming visibly uncomfortable, with some pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. An older woman across the aisle spoke up in a worried voice. "Officer, this doesn't seem right. She's done nothing wrong that I can see." "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one time to stay out of this," Bradley warned. "This is a security investigation, and interfering with it is a federal offense." The threat of federal charges silenced some passengers, but it also made others more determined to speak up. A young man in his 20s called out from several rows back, "This is ridiculous. You can't just harass someone because you don't like how they look." Bradley's patience was completely exhausted. He had expected to conduct a routine security check and return to his other duties. Instead, he found himself in the middle of what felt like a passenger rebellion, all because of one woman who refused to admit her documents were fake. "That's it," he announced loudly. "Everyone needs to be quiet and let me handle this situation. If anyone else interferes, they'll be removed from this aircraft and face federal charges." Lisa realized that Bradley was beyond reasoning with. His ego was now invested in proving that he was right, regardless of the evidence. She also understood that every moment this confrontation continued, it became more traumatic for the other passengers, especially the children. "Officer Bradley," she said, standing up slowly with her hands visible, I'll come with you if it will help resolve this situation. I just want everyone to remain calm. Finally, Bradley said with satisfaction, someone who understands how serious this is. As Lisa gathered her purse and prepared to follow Bradley off the aircraft, she caught the eye of David, the flight attendant. She gave him a slight nod, hoping he would understand that she was trying to protect the other passengers from further distress. David looked torn between his desire to defend Lisa and his recognition that confronting Bradley more aggressively might put other crew members and passengers at risk. He made a mental note to contact the airline's operations center as soon as possible to report what was happening. The elderly gentleman who had first spoken up shook his head sadly. "This is shameful," he said quietly to his wife. "Absolutely shameful." Bradley heard the comment and turned around one more time. "What's shameful is people who don't appreciate the hard work that security officers do to keep them safe. I'm protecting all of you from potential threats, and this is the thanks I get." As Lisa followed Bradley toward the front of the aircraft, she could hear concerned murmurs throughout the cabin. Some passengers were already on their phones, calling family members to describe what they were witnessing. Others were checking social media to see if anyone else was talking about the incident. The businessman Mike shook his head in disgust. "I travel a lot and I've never seen anything like this. That officer is way out of line." The young woman who had been worried about missing her family dinner looked upset for entirely different reasons now. "I can't believe this is happening. She seemed so nice and professional." Bradley reached the aircraft door and turned to face Lisa one final time before they left the plane. "I hope you understand how serious it is to carry fraudulent documents. This could result in federal charges and significant prison time." Lisa took a deep breath and looked back at the cabin full of passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. Many of them looked angry, others appeared sad, and some seemed confused about what they had just seen. "Officer Bradley," she said calmly, "I hope that when this is all sorted out, you'll take some time to think about how your assumptions affected everyone on this aircraft today." Bradley just snorted and gestured for her to exit the plane. He was confident that within an hour, he would have proven that Lisa was carrying fake documents and potentially planning something dangerous. In his mind, he was about to be vindicated in front of all the passengers who had questioned his judgment. He had no idea that the biggest embarrassment of his career was only minutes away. As Lisa followed Officer Bradley toward the aircraft exit, she could feel the eyes of every passenger watching her departure. The cabin had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the whispered conversations of people trying to process what they had just witnessed. Bradley walked with the confident swagger of a man who believed he had just uncovered a serious security threat. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that Lisa was not who she claimed to be. The fact that she remained so calm and professional only reinforced his suspicion that she was hiding something significant. "Keep moving," Bradley ordered as they reached the jet bridge. "We're going straight to the security office where we can examine these so-called credentials more carefully." Lisa maintained her composure, though internally she was calculating how long this process might take, and whether the airline would be able to find another pilot before passengers started demanding to be rebooked on different flights. Her primary concern wasn't for herself, but for the 147 people sitting behind her who just wanted to get home to Denver. The jet bridge was empty except for ground crew members preparing for what they thought would be a normal departure once a replacement pilot arrived. A baggage handler looked up in surprise as Bradley marched Lisa past him, with the stern expression of someone conducting an arrest. "Ma'am, you need to understand the serious legal trouble you're in," Bradley said loudly, his voice echoing off the walls of the jet bridge. "Carrying fraudulent federal documents is a felony. Impersonating a commercial pilot is a federal crime. Depending on what else we discover, you could be facing decades in prison." Lisa knew that Bradley was wrong on multiple counts, but she also knew that correcting him would only fuel his anger. She had dealt with difficult people throughout her career, and experience had taught her that sometimes the best strategy was to let them talk themselves into a corner. As they walked, Bradley continued his lecture. "I've been doing this job for 20 years and I can spot a fake from a mile away. You might have fooled some people with your little act back there, but you're not fooling me. Real pilots don't look like college students. They don't dress in jeans and sneakers. And they certainly don't sit in coach trying to blend in with regular passengers." Behind them, back on the aircraft, Passengers were pulling out their phones in unprecedented numbers. The confrontation had been impossible to ignore, and many people felt compelled to document what they had witnessed. The elderly gentleman who had first spoken up in Lisa's defense was shaking his head sadly as he called his daughter. "Honey, you won't believe what I just saw on this airplane. A security officer just removed a young woman for absolutely no good reason. It was the most disgraceful display of prejudice I've witnessed in years." The businessman Mike, who rarely used social media, found himself typing a detailed account of the incident on his company's internal messaging system. "Just witnessed the most unprofessional behavior by airport security I've ever seen. They removed a passenger who claimed to be a pilot, but the officer clearly didn't believe her because she's young and Hispanic. Absolutely shameful." The mother with 2 children was trying to explain to her kids why the nice lady had been taken away by the policeman. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetie. That man was confused about something, but I'm sure it will get sorted out soon." Her 6-year-old son wasn't satisfied with that explanation. "But Mommy, she didn't do anything wrong. Why was he being mean to her?" It was a question that many adults on the plane were asking themselves as well. Meanwhile, flight attendant David had managed to contact the airline's operations center. Using the aircraft's communication system, he spoke in urgent, hushed tones to the duty manager, explaining what had just happened and requesting immediate assistance. "We need someone from management down here right away," David explained. "Airport security just removed Captain Rodriguez from the aircraft. The officer claimed her credentials were fake, but I can verify that she's one of our qualified pilots. This is turning into a major incident." The duty manager on the other end of the line was stunned. "Captain Rodriguez? Lisa Rodriguez? She's one of our most experienced pilots. Are you sure it was her?" "Absolutely certain. I've flown with her multiple times." The security officer completely ignored her legitimate credentials and basically accused her of being some kind of terrorist. Passengers are upset, phones are out, and this is going to be a public relations nightmare if we don't handle it correctly. Back in the jet bridge, Bradley was still lecturing Lisa about the severity of her supposed crimes. "When we get to the security office, we're going to run these documents through every database we have. We're going to contact the FBI, Homeland Security, and probably the Secret Service. By the time we're done, everyone is going to know exactly what kind of person you really are." Lisa finally spoke, her voice remaining remarkably steady despite the circumstances. "Officer Bradley, I encourage you to contact whoever you feel is necessary. I'm confident that any investigation will confirm exactly what I've told you from the beginning." Bradley interpreted her calm confidence as arrogance. "You're pretty cocky for someone who's about to spend the next several years in federal prison. I guess we'll see how confident you are when you're sitting in a jail cell." They reached the gate area, where other passengers waiting for different flights looked up in curiosity as Bradley paraded Lisa past them. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something newsworthy was happening. Others just stared, trying to figure out what could possibly require such an aggressive display of authority. A gate agent for a different airline approached Bradley hesitantly. "Officer, is everything okay? Do you need any assistance?" "Everything's under control," Bradley replied briskly. "Just removing a potential security threat from an aircraft. Nothing for you to worry about." The gate agent looked at Lisa, who appeared completely calm and unthreatening, then back at Bradley with obvious confusion. She had worked at the airport for 8 years and had never seen someone who looked less like a security threat. As they continued walking toward the security office, Bradley's radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was urgent and slightly breathless. "Officer Bradley, this is dispatch. We need you to return to Gate B12 immediately. There's been a development with Flight 447. Bradley stopped walking and grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I'm in the middle of processing a suspect. Can this wait?" "Negative, Officer Bradley. You need to return to that gate right now. The airline's operations manager is en route, and there are some questions about the passenger you removed." Lisa couldn't help but smile slightly. She had been wondering how long it would take for the airline to realize what had happened and send someone to straighten out the situation. Bradley noticed her expression and misinterpreted it completely. "You think this is funny? You think having the FBI investigate you is amusing? Officer Bradley, I think you're about to discover that this situation is very different from what you believe it to be." Bradley's radio crackled again. "Officer Bradley, respond immediately. The duty manager reports that you may have removed one of the airline's qualified pilots from the aircraft." Return to gate B12 now. For the first time since the confrontation began, Bradley looked uncertain. The confidence in his voice wavered slightly as he responded to the radio call. Dispatch, are you sure about that information? The passenger I removed was carrying obviously fraudulent documents. Officer Bradley, returned to the gate immediately. That's a direct order. Bradley looked at Lisa with growing confusion and the first hint of concern. The absolute certainty he had felt just minutes earlier was beginning to crack as doubt crept into his mind. Come on, he said to Lisa, though his tone was noticeably less aggressive than before. We're going back to the gate to clear this up. As they turned around and began walking back toward Flight 447, Lisa felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew that vindication was coming, but she also knew that the real test would be what happened next. Would this incident become a learning opportunity, or would it just be swept under the rug and forgotten? More importantly, she wondered how the passengers who had witnessed Bradley's behavior would react when they learned the truth about who she really was. The walk back to gate B12 felt much different than the walk away from it. Officer Bradley's confident stride had been replaced by uncertain steps, and his aggressive posture had given way to visible nervousness. The radio call from dispatch had planted seeds of doubt that were growing larger with each passing moment. Lisa walked beside him quietly, allowing him to process whatever thoughts were running through his mind. She felt no satisfaction in his obvious discomfort. As a professional pilot, she understood that everyone made mistakes, and the measure of a person wasn't whether they erred, but how they handled the aftermath of their errors. As they approached the gate, Bradley could see increased activity that hadn't been there when they left. Several airline employees in management uniforms were gathered near the aircraft door, engaged in intense conversation. A woman in a supervisor's uniform was speaking rapidly into her phone while looking through paperwork. The gate agent who had made the original announcements about the pilot shortage spotted them, approaching and immediately called out to her supervisor. Ms. Johnson, Officer Bradley is back with the passenger. Ms. Johnson, the duty manager for the airline, ended her phone call and walked quickly toward them. Her expression was a mixture of concern, confusion, and barely controlled frustration. She had been with the airline for 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this one. Officer Bradley, Ms. Johnson said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. I need to speak with you immediately about the passenger you removed from Flight 447. Bradley straightened his shoulders, trying to project confidence he no longer felt. Ms. Johnson, I was conducting a routine security sweep when I discovered this individual carrying what appeared to be fraudulent federal documents. She was claiming to be a commercial pilot, which seemed highly unlikely given her appearance and behavior. Ms. Johnson looked at Lisa, recognition dawning in her eyes. Captain Rodriguez? Is that you? Yes, ma'am, Lisa replied simply. Bradley's face went pale as the implication of the duty manager's recognition hit him. Captain? Did you just call her Captain? Ms. Johnson turned to Bradley with an expression that could have frozen water. Officer Bradley, meet Captain Lisa Rodriguez, one of our most experienced and respected pilots. She has been flying for our airline for 8 years and has an impeccable safety record. She was dead-heading home to Denver after completing a 3-day trip sequence. The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. He looked back and forth between Ms. Johnson and Lisa, his mind struggling to process this new information. Everything he had been so certain about was crumbling around him. But that's impossible, Bradley stammered. She doesn't look like a pilot. She's too young, and she was dressed like a regular passenger. Captain Rodriguez is 38 years old and fully qualified to operate every aircraft in our fleet, Ms. Johnson explained with barely controlled anger. She was dressed casually because she was traveling as a passenger, which is completely normal for deadheading crew members. Behind them, passengers on Flight 447 were watching through the aircraft windows as the drama unfolded in the gate area. Word was spreading quickly through the cabin that something significant was happening, and phones were coming out to record whatever was about to occur. Flight attendant David appeared at the aircraft door, relief visible on his face as he saw Lisa standing safely in the gate area. Captain Rodriguez! Thank goodness you're okay. We were so worried about you. Bradley's humiliation deepened as more airline employees began to recognize Lisa and express concern for her well-being. A mechanic who had been working on a nearby aircraft walked over when he heard David call her Captain. Hey, Captain Rodriguez, I heard there was some kind of problem with your flight. Everything okay? Lisa smiled at the mechanic whom she had known for several years. Hi, Tony. There was a small misunderstanding, but I think we're getting it sorted out now. Bradley was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Not only had he wrongly accused an innocent person, but he had publicly humiliated a respected airline captain in front of 147 passengers. The implications for his career were starting to become clear. Ms. Johnson pulled out her phone and began making calls. I need to notify our legal department immediately, she said to her assistant. We also need to contact public relations because this is likely to become a media story. The passengers on the aircraft were becoming increasingly restless as they watched the scene unfold outside. The elderly gentleman who had first defended Lisa was shaking his head and commenting to anyone who would listen. I knew that officer was wrong, he said loudly enough for several rows to hear. You could tell that young lady was a professional just by how she handled herself. That officer should be ashamed of his behavior. The businessman Mike was typing furiously on his phone, updating his earlier social media posts with new information. This is unbelievable. The passenger that security removed is actually a pilot. The officer was completely wrong, and now he's been caught red-handed. Meanwhile, Ms. Johnson had finished her phone calls and turned her attention back to the immediate situation.
Captain Rodriguez, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about what you've experienced today.
This kind of treatment is absolutely unacceptable, and I assure you that we will be taking this matter very seriously. I appreciate that, Lisa replied professionally. Right now, my main concern is getting these passengers to Denver. They've been delayed long enough, and I imagine some of them have important commitments this evening. Bradley finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Captain Rodriguez, I had no idea. I thought you were... I was just trying to do my job. Lisa looked at him with an expression that was firm but not unkind. Officer Bradley, doing your job means treating all passengers with respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like or how old they are. It means making decisions based on facts, not assumptions or prejudices. But your documents, I thought they looked suspicious. My documents are issued by the Federal Aviation Administration and are completely legitimate. If you had taken the time to verify them properly instead of making assumptions, this entire situation could have been avoided. Ms. Johnson stepped forward. Officer Bradley, I'm going to need you to provide a written report about this incident. The airline will also be filing a formal complaint with Airport Security Management about your conduct. Bradley nodded miserably, finally understanding that his actions would have serious consequences. 20 years of service had been tarnished by one afternoon of poor judgment and prejudicial thinking. Captain Rodriguez, Ms. Johnson continued, would you be willing to operate Flight 447 to Denver? I know this has been a traumatic experience, but we have 147 passengers who need to get home. Lisa considered the question carefully. She was certainly qualified and legal to fly, but she also needed to consider whether she was emotionally ready to take on the responsibility after what had just happened. Give me a few minutes to collect myself, and then yes, I'll be happy to get everyone home safely. Ms. Johnson smiled with relief. Thank you, Captain. I'll make an announcement to the passengers explaining the situation. As Ms. Johnson headed toward the aircraft to address the passengers, Bradley stood alone with Lisa for a moment. The swagger and aggression that had defined his behavior earlier had been completely replaced by shame and regret. Captain Rodriguez, he said quietly, I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I truly am sorry. I was wrong about everything. Lisa looked at him thoughtfully. Officer Bradley, we all make mistakes. What matters now is what you learn from this experience and how you treat people in the future. Bradley nodded, knowing that he would carry the memory of this day for the rest of his career. As he walked away from the gate, his radio crackled with a message from his supervisor requesting his immediate presence in the security office. Meanwhile, Lisa took a deep breath and prepared to do what she loved most, fly an airplane full of people safely to their destination. Lisa stood in the gate area for a moment, gathering her thoughts and preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most memorable flights of her career. The passengers on Flight 447 had witnessed something extraordinary, and now she needed to transform from the victim of discrimination into the professional captain who would safely deliver them to Denver. Ms. Johnson approached her with a concerned expression. Captain Rodriguez, are you absolutely certain you're ready to operate this flight? No one would blame you if you needed more time to process what just happened. Lisa appreciated the consideration, but her answer came without hesitation. I'm ready. These passengers have been delayed long enough and they deserve to get home tonight. Thank you, Ms. Johnson said with genuine gratitude. I'll make an announcement to explain the situation, and then we can get you set up in the cockpit. As Ms. Johnson walked toward the aircraft, Lisa retrieved her small suitcase and headed to the crew facilities to change into her uniform. The transformation from casual passenger to commercial airline captain would be symbolic as much as practical. Inside the aircraft, Ms. Johnson picked up the intercom handset and prepared to address the passengers who had been waiting anxiously for updates about their delayed flight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Johnson, the duty manager for the airline. I want to personally apologize for the delay, and especially for the unfortunate incident you witnessed earlier. I'm pleased to inform you that we have resolved our pilot shortage and will be departing for Denver shortly. Murmurs of curiosity rippled through the cabin as passengers wondered what she meant by resolved our pilot shortage. Ms. Johnson continued. Captain Rodriguez, the passenger who was incorrectly removed from the aircraft by airport security, is actually one of our most experienced and qualified pilots. She has graciously agreed to operate today's flight despite the treatment she received. We should be boarding our flight crew momentarily. The reaction was immediate and powerful. Applause erupted throughout the cabin, starting with the elderly gentleman who had first defended Lisa and quickly spreading to every row. The businessman, Mike, was clapping enthusiastically while shaking his head in amazement. The mother with 2 children explained to her kids that the nice lady was going to be their pilot. You see, she told her 6-year-old son, I told you everything would work out okay. Sometimes when people make mistakes, other people step up to help fix things. Flight attendant David smiled broadly as he heard the passengers' reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had the privilege of working with Captain Rodriguez on several flights, and I can tell you that you're in excellent hands today. The young woman who had been worried about missing her family dinner wiped away tears of emotion. This is incredible, she said to the passenger next to her. She's going to fly us home after what that officer put her through? That's the most professional thing I've ever seen. Outside the aircraft, Lisa emerged from the crew facilities in her crisp captain's uniform. The transformation was striking. The casual clothes were gone, replaced by the navy blue uniform with 4 stripes on each sleeve that immediately commanded respect and authority. Her captain's hat sat perfectly positioned, and her posture radiated confidence and professionalism. Several airport employees who had gathered to watch the drama unfold began applauding as Lisa walked past them toward the aircraft. Word of the incident had spread quickly through the airport community, and many people wanted to show their support for how she had handled the situation. When Lisa appeared at the aircraft door in her full captain's uniform, the applause from passengers grew even louder. Some people stood up in their seats, others whistled their approval, and a few wiped away tears at the powerful symbolism of the moment. Lisa paused at the entrance to the cabin and smiled warmly at the passengers who had witnessed her ordeal. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Captain Rodriguez speaking. I want to thank you for your patience during today's delay, and I'm honored to be your captain for the flight to Denver. The elderly gentleman called out from his seat. Captain, we're honored to have you flying our plane. More applause followed, and Lisa felt genuinely moved by the support these strangers were showing her. I promise you a safe and smooth flight to Denver. We should be airborne in about 20 minutes. As Lisa made her way toward the cockpit, passengers reached out to shake her hand or offer words of encouragement. The businessman Mike stood up as she passed his row. Captain, what happened to you today was disgraceful, but the way you've handled it shows incredible class and professionalism. Thank you for still taking care of us. Thank you, Lisa replied sincerely. That means a lot to me. The mother with 2 children called her over. Captain, my kids want to say something to you. Lisa knelt down to eye level with the children. The little boy spoke first. Are you really going to fly our airplane? I sure am, Lisa said with a smile. Would you like to see the cockpit after we land in Denver? Both children nodded enthusiastically, and their mother mouthed thank you with tears in her eyes. Lisa entered the cockpit and began her pre-flight preparations with the focused intensity that had made her such a respected pilot. She reviewed weather reports, calculated fuel requirements, and checked all aircraft systems with meticulous attention to detail. her co-pilot for the flight. Captain James Wright had arrived shortly after the incident was resolved. He had heard about what happened from other crew members and was both appalled by Bradley's behavior and inspired by Lisa's professionalism. "Lisa, I can't believe what you went through today," James said as they worked through their checklists. "Most people would have walked away from this flight." "These passengers didn't do anything wrong," Lisa replied while reviewing the flight plan. "They deserve to get home safely, and that's our job. Well, I'm proud to be flying with you today. Let's give them the smoothest flight they've ever experienced." Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers were sharing their thoughts about what they had witnessed. Many were already posting updates on social media, and several had started recording video messages to share with friends and family. The young woman called her mother to update her about the delay. "Mom, you're not going to believe what happened on this flight. Our pilot was actually a passenger who got harassed by security for no reason. Now she's going to fly us home anyway. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen." An older businessman was on his phone with his wife. "Honey, I witnessed something today that really changed my perspective. A young Hispanic woman was treated terribly by airport security, but she handled it with more grace and dignity than I've ever seen. She's our pilot now, and I've never felt safer on an airplane." Back in the cockpit, Lisa and James completed their pre-flight checks and received clearance from air traffic control for departure. Lisa picked up the intercom to address the passengers one final time before takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We've been cleared for departure and should have you on the ground in Denver in about 2 hours and 15 minutes. The weather is beautiful both here and in Denver, so we're expecting a very smooth flight. Thank you again for your patience and understanding today." As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, passengers looked out their windows to see ground crew members waving and giving thumbs-up signals. Word of the incident had spread throughout the airport, and many employees wanted to show their support for Lisa. The elderly gentleman who had first spoken up in Lisa's defense settled back in his seat with satisfaction. "Sometimes," he said to his wife, "justice does prevail." That young woman turned what could have been a terrible day into something inspiring. His wife nodded in agreement. She showed us all what real character looks like under pressure. As Flight 447 taxied toward the runway, Lisa felt a sense of closure about the day's events. She had faced prejudice and discrimination, but she had also experienced the kindness and support of strangers who were willing to stand up for what was right. More importantly, she was about to do what she loved most in the world: fly an airplane full of people safely to their destination. No amount of ignorance or prejudice could take away her love for aviation or her commitment to serving passengers with professionalism and care. The plane turned onto the active runway, and Lisa advanced the throttles for takeoff. As the aircraft lifted off the ground and climbed into the clear afternoon sky, she smiled with the knowledge that this flight would be remembered by everyone on board for the rest of their lives. Flight 447 climbed smoothly into the clear afternoon sky, with Captain Lisa Rodriguez at the controls delivering exactly the kind of professional, safe flight she had promised her passengers. The Boeing 737 cut through the air effortlessly, and Lisa felt the familiar peace that came with being in her natural element. The cockpit of a commercial airliner. In the cabin behind her, passengers were having conversations they would remember for years to come. The incident with Officer Bradley had transformed a routine flight into something much more meaningful, and people were processing what they had witnessed in different ways. The elderly gentleman who had first spoken up in Lisa's defense was writing in a small notebook he always carried with him. As a retired teacher, he wanted to capture the details of what he had seen, so he could share the story with his grandchildren. "What are you writing, dear?" his wife asked. "I'm documenting what happened today," he replied thoughtfully. "This young woman showed us what real courage and professionalism look like. I want to make sure I remember every detail." The businessman, Mike, was on his laptop, composing a detailed email to his company's human resources department. The incident had made him reflect on his own workplace and whether they were doing enough to ensure fair treatment for all employees. "I've been thinking," he said to his traveling companion, "about how many times I might have made assumptions about people based on how they look or how old they are. This pilot has really opened my eyes." Meanwhile, the mother with 2 young children was using the flight time to have an important conversation with her kids about treating all people with respect and kindness. "Remember what we saw today," she told her 6-year-old son. That police officer was wrong because he judged the nice lady by how she looked instead of listening to what she said. We should never treat people that way. Her daughter, who was 8, asked a perceptive question. Mommy, why did he think she couldn't be a pilot just because she's a girl? It was exactly the kind of question that would lead to many important family discussions in the weeks to come. As Flight 447 cruised toward Denver, several passengers were already sharing their experiences on social media. The young woman who had been worried about missing her family dinner posted a video on her phone describing what she had witnessed. I'm on a plane right now with the most amazing pilot I've ever encountered, she said into her camera. She was harassed by airport security for no reason other than how she looks, but she's flying us home anyway. This is what real heroes look like. The video would be shared thousands of times within hours of landing, eventually reaching millions of people around the world. In the cockpit, Lisa and her co-pilot James were maintaining professional focus on the flight, but they were also discussing the broader implications of what had happened. Lisa, I hope you know that not everyone in law enforcement thinks like that, officer, James said during a quiet moment. Most security personnel are professional and fair. I know that, Lisa replied. This incident isn't about all security officers or all police. It's about the danger of making assumptions about people based on stereotypes and prejudices. It's about the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Well, you certainly showed everyone how to handle a difficult situation with grace. I've learned something important today just by watching you. As they began their descent into Denver, Lisa made an announcement to the passengers that would become another memorable moment of the flight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We're beginning our descent into Denver, where the weather is clear and beautiful. Before we land, I want to say something about what happened earlier today. The cabin fell completely silent as passengers turned their attention to Lisa's words. What occurred at our departure airport was unfortunate, but it also showed me something wonderful about human nature. I saw passengers stand up for a stranger when they thought she was being treated unfairly. I saw people choose to do what was right even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That gives me hope for our world. Spontaneous applause broke out again and several passengers wiped away tears. Lisa continued, I also want to thank you for your patience and understanding. You could have been angry about the delay or upset about the disruption, but instead you showed kindness and support. You made a difficult situation much easier to handle. The flight landed smoothly at Denver International Airport, touching down exactly on schedule despite the earlier delays. As passengers prepared to disembark, many lingered to speak with Lisa personally. The elderly gentleman waited until most passengers had left before approaching the cockpit door. Captain Rodriguez, I want you to know that what I witnessed today reminded me why I became a teacher 40 years ago. You showed those children on this flight what courage and dignity look like under pressure. Lisa was genuinely touched by his words. Thank you, sir. Your willingness to speak up when you saw something wrong made all the difference to me. The businessman Mike also stopped to talk with Lisa. Captain, I travel constantly for work, and I've never seen anything like what happened today. You've inspired me to be more aware of how I treat people, and more willing to stand up when I see injustice. As passengers finally finished disembarking, Lisa and James completed their post-flight duties and prepared to leave the aircraft. The ground crew members at the gate were waiting to congratulate Lisa on how she had handled the situation. Captain Rodriguez, said the lead mechanic, word about what happened has spread all over the airport. We're all proud of how you represented our profession today. Over the following days and weeks, the story of Flight 447 continued to unfold in ways that none of the participants could have predicted. Passenger videos and social media posts about the incident went viral, sparking conversations about discrimination, professionalism, and the importance of standing up for others. The airline moved quickly to address the situation. Within 48 hours, they had issued a public apology to Lisa and announced new training programs for airport security, personnel about unconscious bias, and proper procedures for verifying passenger credentials. Officer, Bradley faced serious consequences for his actions. After a thorough investigation, he was suspended without pay for 30 days and required to complete extensive training on cultural sensitivity and anti-discrimination policies. He also wrote a personal letter of apology to Lisa, acknowledging his mistakes and promising to do better in the future. The incident became a case study in business schools and diversity training programs across the country. Lisa was invited to speak at conferences about leadership, under pressure, and overcoming discrimination in the workplace, but perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the change in perspective experienced by the passengers who witnessed the events firsthand. Many reported that the experience had made them more aware of their own biases and more willing to speak up when they saw others being treated unfairly. The elderly gentleman kept his promise to share the story with his grandchildren, using it as a teaching moment about courage, dignity, and the importance of doing what's right even when it's difficult. The mother with 2 children found that her kids frequently referenced Captain Lisa when they encountered situations involving fairness and standing up for others. The businessman Mike implemented new diversity and inclusion initiatives at his company, directly inspired by what he had witnessed on Flight 447. Lisa returned to her regular flying schedule, but she also became an advocate for diversity in aviation and a mentor for young women interested in pilot careers. She spoke at schools and aviation events about pursuing dreams despite obstacles and the importance of perseverance in the face of discrimination. The story of Flight 447 became more than just an account of one person's bad behavior and another person's professional response. It became a reminder that ordinary people have the power to create extraordinary change when they choose to treat others with dignity, stand up for what's right, and respond to adversity with grace and professionalism. Years later, passengers from that flight would still share the story with friends and family, remembering not just the discrimination they witnessed, but also the courage, kindness, and humanity they saw in response to it. Lisa Rodriguez had shown them all what it truly meant to rise above prejudice and turn a moment of injustice into an opportunity for positive change. The flight had lasted just over 2 hours, but its impact would last a lifetime for everyone who was there to witness it.